My name is Selena Swift, and at 31 years old, I finally achieved my dream of launching my own marketing consultancy. After months of careful planning and saving every dollar, I kept it secret from my controlling family. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I arrived at my office to find my mother, Margaret, conducting a client presentation to my biggest prospect without my knowledge or permission. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching her sabotage everything I had worked for while presenting herself as my business partner. If you have ever had family members who completely overstepped your professional boundaries, drop a comment below and let me know where you are watching from. Please hit subscribe if you want to hear what happened next. Growing up in the Swift household meant never having a decision that was truly your own. My mother, Margaret, was the definition of a micromanager who extended her controlling tendencies far beyond normal parental guidance. From my earliest memories, independence was treated as rebellion rather than natural development. My childhood was spent under constant surveillance disguised as loving concern. I still remember the suffocating feeling at 16 when I discovered my mother had called my part-time boss at the local bookstore to check in on my performance and suggest improvements to my work schedule. The burning humiliation when she showed up during my shift to introduce herself to customers as Selena's mother who helps her make good decisions still makes my stomach clench. When I confronted her that evening, tears streaming down my face, she seemed genuinely bewildered by my distress. "I'm only trying to help you succeed, Selena," she said, her voice maddeningly calm. "How else can I make sure you're making the right choices?" That moment crystallized something for me. In our house, love and control were considered synonymous. My mother monitored my homework, second-guessed my friend choices, and questioned my teachers with the intensity of her investigative journalist. My father, Robert, was more passive but never challenged her behavior, creating a silent endorsement I couldn't penetrate. The dynamic became even more complex when my younger sister Isabella was born when I was 9. She quickly became the family favorite, though subjected to the same suffocating oversight I endured. But unlike me, Isabella seemed to flourish under the attention, perhaps because as the baby and the artistic one, the scrutiny came packaged with special privileges and endless praise for her creative talents. "Your sister needs more encouragement because she's sensitive," became a common refrain whenever I pointed out the disparity in our treatment. I learned to need less attention, want fewer resources, and eventually to expect nothing for myself. I taught myself to keep my ambitions hidden, not in journals that could be discovered, but buried deep within my thoughts where no one could reach them. When I left for college, freedom seemed within reach for the first time. I chose a university 3 hours away, far enough to require living on campus, but close enough to avoid triggering my mother's separation anxiety. Those first few months were intoxicating. No one questioned my schedule or demanded explanations for my choices. I could study what interested me without commentary on its practical applications. But the freedom was an illusion. By Thanksgiving, my mother had somehow connected with my academic advisor, Professor Davis, and was receiving regular updates about my course selections and performance. She began making surprise visits at least twice monthly, always bearing care packages and cleaning supplies, always finding ways to rearrange my dorm room while criticizing my roommate Sarah's influence on my organization skills. After college, I accepted a position as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm in our hometown, partly because the opportunity seemed solid, but mostly because the alternative, a position in New York, was met with such an elaborate campaign of worry and guilt that I found myself surrendering to the familiar gravitational pull of family expectations. "Successful people stay close to their support systems," my mother insisted. "You'll thank me someday when you need help navigating your career." The pattern continued as I established myself professionally. I rented an apartment 20 minutes from my parents' home, close enough to make declining weekly family dinners nearly impossible, but far enough that daily supervision required some planning. When Isabella graduated with her art degree and moved back home to figure things out, I watched with familiar envy as she was celebrated for her creative journey while my practical career was treated as a stepping stone to something better that my mother would help me identify. Isabella's artwork filled my parents' home, her exhibitions were family events, and her artistic struggles were met with emotional and financial support. Meanwhile, my steady career progression was acknowledged with suggestions for improvement. "Have you considered asking for more challenging projects?" my mother would say regularly. "I saw an article about women who negotiate better. I could help you prepare for your next review." The underlying message was clear: whatever I was doing wasn't quite enough, and certainly wasn't something I could handle alone. But I had been quietly developing skills and building a network, learning everything I could about digital marketing and client relations. As a coordinator, I had access to strategies and campaigns that sparked ideas for how things could be done better, more efficiently, more creatively. By 29, I had identified gaps in the local market and begun formulating a plan for my own consultancy. I tried once 2 years ago to explain my entrepreneurial aspirations. The family dinner I used to discuss my possible business venture became an intervention, with everyone from my father to Isabella to my grandmother Dorothy listing reasons why starting a business would be financially disastrous and emotionally overwhelming. "You've always been a dreamer," my mother said, tears forming in her eyes. "But dreams don't pay bills. What if you fail? Who will help you pick up the pieces? What if clients don't take you seriously because you're young and inexperienced?" Defeated by the barrage of doubts and worst-case scenarios, I retreated and dropped the subject entirely. But something had shifted inside me. I began to understand that my independence would never be granted voluntarily. It would have to be claimed through action rather than permission. With each passing month, my determination grew alongside my secret savings account and my carefully researched business plan. The decision to keep my business launch secret wasn't made lightly. I had witnessed how my family responded to Isabella's art exhibitions, with my mother inserting herself into every conversation with gallery owners, offering unsolicited opinions about pricing and presentation, and essentially presenting herself as Isabella's manager despite having no expertise in the art world. I still remember Isabella's face during her first solo show as my mother approached potential buyers to explain the deeper meaning of pieces that Isabella had spent months perfecting. Though Isabella loved having family support, I could see her confidence waver as her own voice was overshadowed by my mother's more dominant personality. Her artistic vision began to incorporate my mother's suggestions until it became difficult to distinguish Isabella's authentic style from my mother's preferences. I couldn't bear the thought of my business being similarly commandeered. So when I finally felt ready to launch Swift Marketing Solutions, I created an elaborate system of misdirection. I told my family I was taking professional development courses on Tuesday and Thursday evenings when I was actually meeting with potential clients and setting up my office space. I used my lunch breaks for calls with suppliers and business registration appointments. I became expert at deflecting conversations away from my growing excitement about my secret project. My research began in earnest last January during the slowest month for marketing services, when I reasoned fewer people would be actively seeking consultants and the chance of discovery was minimal. I researched target markets carefully, looking for underserved niches where my experience could provide real value. The process was exhausting without family support or even acknowledgement. Every decision rested solely on my judgment. There were nights I lay awake questioning whether the secrecy was creating unnecessary stress, whether I was overreacting to what my mother would surely describe as her desire to help me succeed. But then I would remember Isabella's expression at that gallery opening, and my resolve would strengthen. After 3 months of preparation, I found my perfect office space, a small but professional suite in the downtown business district, 30 minutes from my parents' home in an area they rarely visited. The space had large windows that filled the room with natural light, enough room for client meetings, and most importantly, a sense of possibility that made my vision feel tangible. My business advisor, Marcus Chen, noticed my excitement immediately. Unlike other consultants I had interviewed, he never questioned my decision to bootstrap the business or suggested I needed a business partner. A man in his 40s with an encouraging manner and practical approach, he quickly understood my situation without requiring detailed explanations. "You've thought this through thoroughly," he said after reviewing my business plan. This isn't a whim, this is a calculated career move. You're ready for this challenge. The validation from someone with no family agenda was intoxicating. The business registration process required careful coordination. I scheduled appointments for Wednesday mornings, telling my current employer I had medical appointments and my family I had important client meetings. I created a separate email address exclusively for business correspondence and rented a post office box for all official documents. I even hired a virtual assistant to handle initial client inquiries, ensuring that if anyone called asking questions, they would speak to a professional who knew nothing about my family situation. Through it all, guilt gnawed at me persistently. Was I being paranoid? Would my family actually be supportive if I gave them the chance? The doubt was nearly paralyzing at times, but each time my mother made comments about my safe little job or suggested career improvements I hadn't requested, I recommitted to my independent path. The day I received my business license was surreal. Marcus met me at a coffee shop to celebrate, bringing a small potted plant and a bottle of sparkling cider. "Every new business owner needs something growing to symbolize potential," he said with a warm smile. "I'm proud of you, Selena. This business is yours, built on your terms with your vision." I sat in my car afterward, holding the official documents that declared Swift Marketing Solutions a legitimate entity, overwhelmed by a mixture of elation and disbelief. I had done it. I owned a business. The strategies I would develop, the clients I would serve, the success or failure I would experience, all of it was entirely mine. Transitioning from employee to entrepreneur while maintaining my cover required elaborate scheduling. I kept my day job initially, using vacation days and sick leave strategically to meet with potential clients and set up my office. I became adept at taking video calls in neutral locations, always careful to keep my surroundings vague and professional. Those initial weeks of operating Swift Marketing Solutions were a strange double life. At my day job, everything remained as expected, but in my office I was slowly building the business I had always envisioned. I decorated the space with modern, clean lines that would have made my mother suggest more warmth and personality. I organized my files by project priority rather than alphabetically, as she insisted was the only logical method. I chose client work based on interesting challenges rather than just financial security. Small rebellions, but each one a declaration of professional independence. I planned to reveal my business eventually, of course. I wasn't intending to keep it secret forever, just long enough to establish credibility and client relationships that couldn't be undermined by well-meaning family interference. I imagined hosting an open house once everything was running smoothly, presenting my achievement as a fait accompli, my mother being proud of my initiative, my father impressed by my business acumen. But life rarely follows our carefully constructed scenarios, and families seldom respond according to the scripts we write for them in our hopeful moments. The day everything unraveled was unremarkable at first, a Tuesday in late March when spring was asserting itself after a particularly harsh winter. I had been running Swift Marketing Solutions for 2 months, still maintaining my day job while gradually building my client base. That morning, I had a crucial presentation scheduled with Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized law firm that could become my anchor client if I secured their digital marketing contract. I had spent weeks preparing a comprehensive strategy, analyzing their current online presence, and developing a proposal that addressed their specific needs and budget constraints. But at 11:30, my phone buzzed with a text from my biggest prospect, running 2 hours late due to court hearing. "Can we push meeting to 3 p.m.? I agreed immediately, grateful for the extra preparation time. This contract could establish my business's financial foundation and provide the credibility I needed to attract other high-value clients. Making a quick decision to use the extra time productively, I left my day job early, telling my supervisor I had a dentist appointment, and headed to my office to review my presentation materials one more time. The drive downtown was pleasant, spring sunshine warming my car as I mentally rehearsed key points and anticipated potential questions. As I approached my building, confidence filled me. This presentation could change everything, not just financially but emotionally. Success with Henderson and Associates would validate my decision to start the business and prove I could compete professionally without family oversight or assistance. That confidence evaporated instantly when I saw the silver BMW sedan in the visitor parking space outside my building, a car I recognized as my mother's. Next to it was a blue sedan I didn't recognize, but clearly belonged to someone conducting business. My heart began racing as I drove slowly past, unable to process what I was seeing. Perhaps there was an innocent explanation. Maybe my mother was visiting another business in the building. But as I circled the block, mind spinning through possibilities, I glimpsed movement through my office window on the second floor. Someone was definitely in my space, and the sick feeling in my stomach told me exactly who it was. I parked around the corner, hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before managing to lock my car. Walking slowly toward the building, I tried to prepare myself for whatever confrontation awaited. But nothing could have prepared me for what I discovered when I reached my office door. Through the frosted glass, I could hear my mother's voice clearly, her confident, authoritative tone that I knew so well. "Selena has been developing these strategies for months," she was saying. "She's just too modest to present them herself. That's where I come in as her business partner to help communicate her brilliant ideas." Business partner. The words hit me like a physical blow. I eased the door open slightly, staying hidden while trying to understand the full scope of what was happening. Inside my carefully designed office space, my mother sat at my desk, with papers spread before her and my computer open to the presentation I had spent weeks perfecting. Across from her sat two men in business suits who I recognized from my research as senior partners from Henderson and Associates. They were leaning forward attentively as my mother gestured to my marketing charts and discussed strategies I had developed through months of analysis and planning. "The social media component is particularly innovative," she continued, clicking through slides I had created. "Selena studied the latest trends, but I helped her understand how they apply to legal services specifically. My background in community relations gives us unique insight into client psychology." I stood frozen in the hallway, watching my mother claim credit for my work while presenting herself as an equal partner in a business she knew nothing about. The betrayal felt physical, a crushing weight in my chest that made breathing difficult. How had she found out? How had she gotten into my office? How was she conducting my most important business meeting without my knowledge? The men from Henderson and Associates were nodding appreciatively, clearly impressed by what they believed was a mother-daughter consulting team. "This collaborative approach is exactly what we're looking for," one of them said. "Having both generational perspectives will really help us reach diverse client demographics." "Exactly," my mother agreed smoothly. "Selena handles the technical aspects while I manage client relations and strategic oversight. We make an excellent team." I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself, realizing she was not just claiming partnership, but positioning herself as the senior partner responsible for strategic decisions. "When can we meet with Selena directly?" the other partner asked. "We'd like to discuss implementation timelines and reporting structures." My mother's pause was barely perceptible, but I caught it. She hadn't expected this question, hadn't planned beyond this initial presentation. "Selena is finalizing contracts with another client today," she replied smoothly. "But I can make all preliminary decisions and present our proposal for your consideration. She trusts my judgment completely in these matters." The casual assumption that I would accept whatever agreements she made sent a surge of rage through me so powerful I had to grip the doorframe to stay upright. This was exactly what I had feared, exactly why I had kept the business secret. In her mind, my achievement wasn't mine at all. It was a family resource for her to manage and control. My months of planning, my financial risk, my professional vision had all been reduced to a project requiring her guidance and oversight. I remained hidden for another 20 minutes, listening as my mother discussed pricing, service timelines, and contract terms with my potential clients. She quoted rates different from what I had planned, promised services I hadn't offered, and established a reporting relationship that positioned her as the primary contact for all future communications. The worst part was how naturally she assumed authority over my business decisions. This wasn't malicious sabotage. This was my mother genuinely believing she was helping me succeed by taking control of aspects she deemed too challenging for me to handle alone. The paternalistic condescension was perhaps more insulting than outright hostility would have been. When the meeting finally concluded, I watched through the crack in the door as my mother shook hands with both partners, exchanging business cards and scheduling follow-up meetings. "Selena will be so excited about this opportunity," she told them. "She's been working towards something like this her entire career." The men left through the main entrance while my mother remained in my office, gathering papers and apparently making notes on my computer. I waited until I heard the partner's car door slam before entering my own office, keys in hand, fury and determination warring in my chest. "Hello, Mother," I said quietly, stepping into the space I had created, watching her turn from my desk with her expression of surprise that quickly shifted to bright enthusiasm. "I think we need to talk." "Selena!" she exclaimed, rising from my chair as if she belonged there. "I was just finishing up with Henderson and Associates. They're very impressed with our proposal. This partnership is going to be wonderful for your business." The casual way she said our proposal and partnership sent ice through my veins. "My business," I corrected, setting my purse down and moving to stand behind my desk, reclaiming my physical space. "This is my business, Mother. My office, my clients, my proposal. What exactly are you doing here?" Her expression shifted to the patient, explanatory tone she used when she believed I was missing obvious information. "I'm helping you succeed, sweetheart. When I discovered you had started this little venture, I realized you would need guidance navigating client relationships. That's where my experience becomes invaluable." "How did you discover it?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "And how did you get into my office?" She had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, confirming my suspicions before she even spoke. "I may have noticed some mail at your apartment," she admitted. "Business registration documents and office lease agreements. I was worried you were getting involved in something over your head, so I did a little research to make sure you weren't being taken advantage of." The familiar justification, violation disguised as protection, was so typical I almost laughed. "So you made a copy of my office key without permission and scheduled a meeting with my potential clients without my knowledge." My voice was rising despite my efforts to remain calm. "Do you understand how inappropriate that is?" "Inappropriate?" she repeated, her defensive tone emerging. "I secured you a major client, Selena. Henderson and Associates is exactly the kind of account that will establish your credibility. You should be thanking me, not attacking me." "They're not my client," I said firmly. "They're yours now. You quoted different rates, promised different services, and positioned yourself as my business partner. I never agreed to any of that." The reality of what she had done was becoming clearer with each word. She hadn't just interfered, she had essentially hijacked my business launch. "We can work out the details later," she said dismissively. "The important thing is that you have a major contract to start with. Though I do think you should consider adjusting your pricing strategy. The rates you had planned were too low for the value we're providing." "We," "our," U.S. Every pronoun choice reinforced her assumption that my business was now a family enterprise under her management. I stood in my own office, looking at my mother sitting in my chair, discussing my business as if she owned it, and realized this was the moment I had been unconsciously preparing for my entire life. "Get out," I said quietly, pointing toward the door. "Get out of my office right now." She blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting such a direct response. "Selena, you're being emotional. Let's discuss this rationally." "I am being rational," I interrupted. "You violated my privacy, invaded my workspace, and sabotaged my client relationship. There's nothing to discuss. I want you to leave immediately." "I didn't sabotage anything," she protested, her voice taking on the hurt tone that had always made me retreat in the past. "I helped you. Without my intervention, Henderson and Associates would have walked away. They needed to see professional presentation skills and strategic thinking. I provided what you couldn't." The insult was so casual, so deeply embedded in her worldview, that I realized arguing was pointless. She genuinely believed I was incapable of conducting business without her guidance. In her mind, she had saved my business rather than destroyed it. "Give me your key to this office," I said, extending my hand. "Right now." She clutched her purse defensively, clearly reluctant to surrender her access. "Selena, you're overreacting. We're a team now. We need to coordinate our efforts." "We are not a team," I said firmly. "This is my business. I planned it, I financed it, I built it without your knowledge or permission because I knew this would happen. Give me the key and then leave." "You kept it secret from your own family?" she asked, her hurt shifting to indignation. "How could you exclude the people who love you from something so important? Family is supposed to support each other." "Support would have been respecting my decision to start a business," I replied. "Support would have been waiting for me to ask for help. Support would have been trusting me to handle my own client relationships. What you did was take control because you don't believe I'm capable of success without your management." The truth of my words seemed to penetrate her defensive wall for a moment. I saw a flicker of recognition cross her face before the familiar justifications reasserted themselves. "I was trying to help you avoid the mistakes I made when I was your age. Business relationships are complicated and you don't have experience." "I'll never have experience if you keep taking over," I interrupted. "How am I supposed to develop professional confidence when you constantly undermine me by suggesting I need your intervention?" The key reluctantly appeared from her purse, placed on my desk with obvious reluctance. "This is a mistake, Selena," she said, gathering her things with injured dignity. "You'll realize that when you face real challenges and need someone with experience to guide you. Don't come crying to me when this little venture falls apart because you were too proud to accept help." She left with a flourish of wounded martyrdom, leaving me standing alone in my violated office space. The silence felt heavy with the lingering presence of her assumptions and the weight of what I would have to rebuild. My first major business prospect was now corrupted by her involvement, my professional credibility potentially compromised by agreements I hadn't made. The immediate problem was Henderson and Associates. I spent the rest of the afternoon crafting a carefully worded email explaining that there had been a miscommunication during their meeting, that my mother was not actually my business partner, and that I would need to revisit all aspects of their proposal with fresh perspective. I kept the tone professional while essentially disavowing everything my mother had promised them. Their response came the next morning, polite but clearly confused. They had been impressed by what they saw as a unique mother-daughter consulting approach and weren't sure they were interested in working with someone so young and inexperienced on her own. The damage was exactly what I had feared. My mother's involvement had created expectations I couldn't meet while simultaneously undermining confidence in my independent capabilities. That afternoon, I called an emergency locksmith and had every lock in my office building changed. I upgraded to a high-security system and made sure only I had access keys. I also called the building manager to ensure that no one could gain access to my office without my explicit permission, explaining that I'd had a security breach that needed to be prevented from recurring. The emotional aftermath was more complicated than the practical steps. That evening, my phone began ringing with calls from various family members who had clearly received my mother's version of events. Isabella called first, her voice confused and hurt. "Mom says you screamed at her and threw her out of your office," she began without preamble. "She's really upset, Selena. She says she was just trying to help your business succeed." The familiar pattern was already emerging, my mother's hurt feelings taking precedence over the violation that had caused my reaction. "Did she explain how she got into my office?" I asked. "Or why she was conducting client meetings without my knowledge?" A pause on the other end suggested Isabella hadn't heard these details. She said she was surprised to find your office and stopped by to see how things were going. She mentioned helping with a presentation, but she made it sound like you had asked for her assistance. The revised narrative didn't surprise me. By the time my mother had processed what happened, she had probably convinced herself that I had somehow invited her involvement. The ability to rewrite history to cast herself as the victim was a skill she had perfected over decades. "Isabella," I said carefully, "I never told anyone in the family about my business. I never asked for help with client presentations. I never gave anyone permission to access my office. Mom found out by reading my mail, made a copy of my office key, and scheduled a meeting with my potential clients while representing herself as my business partner. When I arrived for my own appointment, she was already conducting the presentation without me." "Oh," Isabella said quietly, and I could hear her processing this information. "That does sound problematic." It was a careful response, acknowledging the issue without fully criticizing our mother. "Why didn't you tell us about the business, though? We could have supported you." "Because this is exactly what I was afraid would happen," I replied. "I needed to establish the business as mine before introducing family involvement. I needed to prove to myself and to potential clients that I could succeed independently." "But we're family," Isabella protested, echoing our mother's familiar refrain. "Family helps each other. Keeping secrets just creates hurt feelings and misunderstandings." The underlying assumption that I owed the family access to my professional decisions was so ingrained that even Isabella, who was generally more supportive than other family members, couldn't see the problem with my mother's actions. Over the next few days, the calls continued. My father, typically conflict avoidant, left a voicemail asking me to work things out with your mother because she's very hurt. My grandmother Dorothy called to express disappointment in my cruel treatment of the woman who raised you. Even my Aunt Rebecca, who lived across the country, somehow got involved to suggest that starting a business was too stressful and maybe I should consider returning to my previous job. The family narrative was crystallizing around the familiar theme. Selena was being ungrateful, rejecting family love, and making poor decisions that required intervention. No one seemed willing to consider that conducting business meetings without the business owner's knowledge might actually be the problematic behavior in this situation. 3 days after the office confrontation, I returned from a morning client meeting to find my mother waiting in the building lobby. She had clearly been there for some time, as she approached me with the determined expression I recognized from childhood moments when she had decided a serious conversation was necessary. "We need to talk," she announced without greeting, falling into step beside me as I headed toward the elevators. "This situation has gone far enough." I stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "What situation would that be, Mother?" "Your reaction to my help with Henderson and Associates," she replied. "You've been avoiding my calls and turning the family against me with your version of events. It's time we cleared the air and moved forward productively." "I haven't been turning anyone against you," I said. "I've been telling people exactly what happened when they called to lecture me about my behavior. If that makes you look bad, perhaps you should consider whether your actions were appropriate." "My actions were appropriate," she insisted. "I saw an opportunity to help your business succeed and I took it. If you had included your family in this venture from the beginning, there wouldn't have been any miscommunication." The word miscommunication was particularly galling, as it suggested the problem was unclear expectations rather than unauthorized actions. "Let's go up to my office," I said finally. "We can talk privately there." I wanted this conversation to happen in my space on my terms, where the physical environment would reinforce my authority. In my office, she immediately began rearranging papers on my desk and adjusting the position of my computer monitor. "This lighting is terrible for client meetings," she commented. "You need to invest in better lamps if you want to create a professional atmosphere." "Don't touch my things," I said firmly, moving to block her access to my desk. "And don't critique my office setup. This space works perfectly for my needs." She looked genuinely surprised by my directness, as if she couldn't understand why I wouldn't welcome her improvements. "Selena, you're being defensive. I'm only trying to help you create the best possible environment for success. If you want to compete with established firms, you need to present yourself professionally." "I am presenting myself professionally," I replied. "What I don't need is family members making unauthorized changes to my workspace or conducting business meetings on my behalf." "About Henderson and Associates," she began, settling into the client chair across from my desk. "I think we got off on the wrong foot, but we can still salvage that relationship. I've been thinking about how to structure our partnership to maximize both our strengths." "There is no partnership," I said clearly. "There will never be a partnership. This is my business and I will run it independently." "But you don't have the experience to handle major clients alone," she protested. Henderson and Associates specifically mentioned being impressed by our collaborative approach. They want the wisdom that comes with my years of experience. "Then perhaps you should start your own consulting business," I suggested. "You could serve clients who specifically want your experience and approach. But this business is mine and it will remain mine." "Starting over at my age would be ridiculous," she replied dismissively. "It makes much more sense for us to work together, combining your technical skills with my client management expertise. We could be very successful as a team." The assumption that I should subordinate my business vision to accommodate her career ambitions was breathtaking in its entitlement. She had appropriated my client, undermined my credibility, and was now suggesting I should be grateful for the opportunity to work as her junior partner in my own company. "I'm going to be very clear," I said, leaning forward to meet her eyes directly. "You are not involved in this business in any capacity. You will not contact my clients, you will not access my office, and you will not represent yourself as associated with Swift Marketing Solutions in any way. If you continue to interfere, I will take legal action to protect my business interests." "Legal action?" she repeated, her voice rising with indignation. "Against your own mother? Selena, you've completely lost perspective. I'm trying to help you succeed and you're threatening to sue me." "I'm threatening to protect my business from unauthorized interference," I corrected. "The fact that the interference comes from a family member doesn't make it less serious, it makes it more hurtful." "You'll regret this," she said, standing abruptly and gathering her purse. "When your business fails because you were too stubborn to accept help, don't expect me to bail you out. You've made your choice to exclude your family, so you can deal with the consequences alone." "I'll take that risk," I replied. "I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed under someone else's control." She left with wounded dignity, but I knew this wasn't over. The next phase would involve escalating pressure from other family members, attempts to make me feel guilty for choosing independence over family unity, and probably efforts to convince potential clients that I was difficult to work with. Sure enough, within a week I began hearing from business contacts that my mother had reached out to introduce herself as someone concerned about my business decisions. She was careful not to directly sabotage my reputation, but her calls created an atmosphere of uncertainty about my stability and judgment. The most difficult part was the isolation. Family gatherings became awkward affairs where my business success was either ignored entirely or discussed with subtle implications that it wouldn't last without proper guidance. Isabella tried to remain neutral, but her attempts at peacemaking often involved suggesting compromises that would give our mother some role in my business decisions. "Maybe she could handle administrative tasks," Isabella proposed during one phone call. "Just filing and scheduling, nothing strategic. It might help her feel included while keeping you in control of important decisions." "Any involvement creates a precedent," I explained. "If I allow her to handle administrative tasks, she'll gradually expand her role until she's managing client relationships again. The only way to maintain boundaries is to maintain them completely." "But she's really hurt, Selena. She feels like you don't trust her judgment or value her experience." Isabella's tone carried the familiar undertone of family guilt, the suggestion that my boundaries were causing unnecessary pain to someone who only wanted to help. "Her feelings are valid," I acknowledged. "But they don't override my right to run my own business. She can feel hurt without me being responsible for fixing those feelings by sacrificing my professional autonomy." 6 months after the Henderson and Associates incident, Swift Marketing Solutions was thriving despite the family drama. I had rebuilt my client base with businesses that valued my independent expertise and direct communication style. The setback with Henderson and Associates had actually clarified my target market, I worked best with clients who appreciated straightforward, unfiltered service rather than the collaborative family approach my mother had promoted. My office had become a true sanctuary, a space where I could engage with clients authentically because I felt secure in my professional boundaries. The security measures that had once felt extreme now seemed like simple prudence, protecting not just my physical space but my professional identity. The most surprising development was that maintaining firm boundaries with my family had actually improved some of our relationships. Isabella began to respect my business decisions more once she saw that I was serious about independence. My father, initially disappointed by my refusal to include my mother in the business, gradually came to admire my determination to succeed on my own terms. Even my mother's behavior began to shift, though slowly and with obvious reluctance. When I invited the family to a small celebration marking my first profitable quarter, she attended and managed to compliment my achievements without suggesting improvements or offering unsolicited advice. The progress was minimal, but it represented movement toward a relationship based on respect rather than control. The key lesson I learned was that professional boundaries, like personal ones, must be established through action rather than discussion. My mother could never have been convinced intellectually that her interference was inappropriate. She had to experience the consequences of her actions to understand that my business decisions were not subject to family oversight. Looking back, I realized that keeping the business secret initially had been necessary protection rather than paranoid behavior. Without that period of independent development, I might never have gained the confidence to resist family pressure or the clarity to recognize what healthy professional boundaries looked like. The turning point in my relationship with my mother came 8 months after I launched Swift Marketing Solutions. I received an unexpected call from her on a Thursday afternoon, her voice unusually subdued and lacking its typical authoritative tone. "Selena," she began hesitantly, "I wonder if we could meet for coffee. There's something I need to discuss with you." The vulnerability in her voice was so uncharacteristic that I agreed immediately, curiosity overriding my usual wariness about family meetings. We met at a neutral coffee shop downtown, the same one where I had celebrated receiving my business license with Marcus so many months earlier. My mother arrived first, already seated at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee waiting. She looked smaller somehow, less imposing than the confident woman who had commandeered my office that day in March. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup as if seeking warmth. "I know things have been difficult between us, and I take responsibility for that." The admission was so unexpected that I simply stared at her, waiting for the inevitable qualification or redirect that usually followed any acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "I've been seeing a therapist," she continued, meeting my eyes directly. "Dr. Patricia Wong. She specializes in family dynamics and boundary issues." Isabella suggested it after she noticed how strained our relationship had become. The revelation that my sister had intervened surprised me. Isabella had always been careful to remain neutral in family conflicts. "What made you decide to see a therapist?" I asked carefully, still suspicious of where this conversation was heading. My mother sighed deeply, looking older than I had ever seen her. "Watching you succeed independently," she replied. "When I saw how well your business was doing without my involvement, better than it had been doing when I tried to help, I realized I might have been wrong about what you needed from me. I also realized," she continued, her voice dropping, "that I was about to lose you entirely. Not just professionally, but personally. You stopped calling, you avoided family gatherings, you kept your achievements to yourself because you didn't trust me to celebrate them without trying to control them." The pain in her voice was genuine, and for the first time in our relationship, I heard her taking responsibility for the distance between us rather than blaming my sensitivity or stubbornness. "Dr. Wong helped me understand something important," my mother said, leaning forward slightly. "She explained that my attempts to help you were actually undermining your confidence because they sent the message that I didn't believe you could succeed alone. Every time I offered unsolicited advice or tried to manage your decisions, I was essentially telling you that you weren't capable." "That's exactly how it felt," I admitted, surprised by my own willingness to engage in this conversation. Every suggestion felt like criticism, every offer to help felt like a vote of no confidence in my abilities. "I never meant it that way," she said quickly, then caught herself. But Dr. Wong explained that my intentions don't matter if the impact is harmful. The impact on you was what mattered, and I consistently chose my need to feel useful over your need to feel trusted. We talked for 2 hours that afternoon, really talked in a way we never had before. My mother shared her own fears about becoming irrelevant as her daughters achieved independence, her struggle with defining her identity beyond her role as manager of our lives. I explained how her constant oversight had made me feel incompetent and uncertain about my own judgment. "I want to be part of your life, Selena," she said as our conversation wound down. "But I want to be part of it in a way that actually supports you rather than undermining you. I don't know how to do that yet, but I'm willing to learn if you're willing to teach me." "I'd like that too," I replied, meaning it. "But it has to start with respecting my professional boundaries completely. No advice unless I ask for it, no contact with my clients under any circumstances, no suggestions about how I should run my business." "Agreed," she said immediately. "Dr. Wong and I have been working on strategies for supporting you without controlling you. It's harder than it sounds, but I'm committed to changing these patterns." The transformation in our relationship wasn't immediate or perfect. Old habits reasserted themselves occasionally, and there were moments when my mother slipped back into her advisory role before catching herself. But the fundamental dynamic had shifted. Instead of fighting about whether my boundaries were reasonable, we were now working together to figure out how to maintain them while preserving our connection. 6 months later, my mother attended my first annual client appreciation event. She introduced herself simply as Selena's mother, rather than trying to insert herself into business conversations. She asked thoughtful questions about my work without offering suggestions for improvement. Most importantly, she celebrated my achievements without claiming any credit for them. "I'm proud of you," she told me as the evening was ending, and for the first time, the words felt genuine rather than conditional. "You built something impressive entirely on your own, and you were right to protect it from my interference." The validation was sweeter for having been earned rather than demanded. My business continued to grow, now supported by family members who understood their role was to cheer from the sidelines rather than jump onto the field. Isabella and I grew closer as well, bonding over our shared experience of establishing independence while maintaining family connections. She had begun setting her own boundaries around her artwork, refusing family input unless specifically requested and insisting on making her own decisions about exhibitions and sales. "Watching you stand up to Mom gave me permission to do the same," she confided during one of our sister dinners. "I realized I had been letting her manage my career because it was easier than risking her disapproval, but I was never going to feel like a real artist as long as someone else was making my professional decisions." Even my father surprised me by acknowledging the changes in our family dynamic. "I should have supported your independence sooner," he admitted during a rare one-on-one conversation. "I was so focused on keeping peace that I enabled your mother's controlling behavior instead of helping her recognize when she was crossing lines." "You couldn't have changed her," I replied. "She had to recognize the problem herself and choose to address it. But I appreciate you saying that." 2 years after launching Swift Marketing Solutions, I was invited to speak at a local business conference about successful solo entrepreneurship. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had once been afraid to start a business without family permission was now advising others on independent business development. My mother attended the presentation, sitting in the back row with obvious pride, but no attempt to insert herself into my professional moment. Afterward, she waited until I had finished speaking with other attendees before approaching. "You were wonderful up there," she said simply. "Professional, confident, knowledgeable. Everything I always knew you could be once you trusted yourself." "Thank you," I replied. "That means a lot coming from you." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The scared woman who had launched a business in secret seemed like a different person, though I knew she was still part of me, the part that had been brave enough to claim independence when claiming it felt impossible. The office keys in my pocket no longer symbolized defiance or protection. They were simply tools that secured a space where I could do work I loved on terms I had set. The security measures I had installed weren't barriers against family invasion, but practical protections for a thriving business. Most importantly, I had learned that boundaries weren't walls designed to keep people out, but guidelines that allowed relationships to function with mutual respect. By insisting on professional autonomy, I had ultimately created space for healthier personal connections. The family dynamic that had once felt suffocating had transformed into something supportive. Not perfect, we still navigated disagreements and misunderstandings, but fundamentally different in its respect for individual choices and boundaries. Swift Marketing Solutions continued to grow, now serving clients across 3 states and employing 2 part-time contractors. The success felt authentic because it was entirely mine, the result of my decisions, my risk-taking, my hard work. When clients complimented my services, I accepted the praise without the nagging voice that used to whisper I couldn't have done it alone. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I had tried to include my family from the beginning, if I had attempted to set boundaries through discussion rather than action. But I suspected the outcome would have been different, less clear, more complicated, probably less successful. The secret launch had given me time to develop confidence in my abilities and clarity about my vision. By the time my mother discovered the business, it was already established enough that her interference couldn't destroy it, only redirect it temporarily. Have you ever had to choose between family harmony and personal autonomy? The decision is never easy, but sometimes necessary for real relationships to develop. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment below sharing your experience. And if you found value in hearing my journey, please hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that professional independence isn't selfish, it's essential for authentic success. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, sometimes the boundaries we need to establish aren't just around our physical spaces, but around our dreams and ambitions. The courage to protect what we're building can ultimately create room for the relationships we actually want rather than the ones we think we're supposed to accept.